Are you tired of copy-pasting the same prompt over and over again in ChatGPT? In this video, I will actually show you how you can code a simple for loop that will let you run a specific prompt as many times as you want. Moreover, I will show you how you can do that completely for free using the Groq API in Microsoft Visual Studio Code. So let's get started. So here I'm in Microsoft Visual Studio Code, and the first thing I need to do is to open a folder where I want to start coding. So let me do that now. So here you can see a number of files that I have in my folder, and you see the episode 4 notebook. This will be the notebook that I will use for the coding. I have here an Excel file with emails, and these are now kind of hypothetical emails for a customer service of an organization. So let me briefly show you how that looks like. So here we have an Excel with emails. So I have now like 4, 5, 6 different emails that I created. And so we have the subject and the actual emails. And so these are all emails addressed to a customer service. And this will be kind of the use case that we will using as an example here. So that's the Excel file that I have in my folder. And I also have my Groq API key. So we will use the Groq platform to communicate with open source large language models. And I already stored my API key here in this text file because that's what I need to use. And here I will now open my actually coding notebook. So we use a Jupyter notebook because that makes it quite easy. I will close at the moment the Copilot agent because we will not use it at the moment. And now we can start with the coding. So the first thing we need to do is to import some packages, namely we need to type in import OS. This is something to make it easy to read files, to read API keys. And because we're using the Groq platform to talk with open source models, we have to write here from Groq import Groq. If you have never used Groq before, you first have to install this package by typing in pip install Groq. And then after you have installed it, you can start using it. So now I will enable my Python here, and then we can load the packages. Then the second thing we need to do is to load our Groq API key. Now, if you don't have an API key yet, let me show it to you. So we need to go to groq.com, then we can click here on get started. And then we will see here, at the first time you will have to also log in now by creating a login or use your Google account. And then we can press here on API keys, and here we can create a new API key. And in that way you can create an API key, and that API key you can then, for instance, store in a separate text file, which I already did. So in the end, what I do here is I write and code to have my API key being read. So I just have to adjust this. So I have here in my folder a file called groq.txt. So that's the file it needs to read. And this will only contain my Groq API key. That's the only thing that is there. So then it just has to read the first line of this text file. And then in this way, by typing OS environment Groq API key as API key, now in the full code, it will know that every time when it has to use an API key, it has to use the key that is stored in this file. So that's how I kind of define my Groq API key here. So now we can press play, and now it has read my API key. So now we can move forward. Now, in the end, I have my emails here stored in an Excel sheet. And if we want to kind of read Excel sheets in Python using Microsoft Visual Code, we need to have a package called Pandas. So again, if this is the first time that you will use Pandas, you will have to install it by doing pip install Pandas. And then we can import Pandas. So we have to write import Pandas SPD. And now I can kind of define my database. And so I will call this database emails, and I then have to type pd.readExcel, and then I have to give it the name. And in this case, the name is customer emails. So now I can press enter. And now, if everything goes well, it has now read my emails in this file. So I can briefly check this. So now I will add some code here. And by typing in emails.head, I can just get the 5 first observations. Now in this file we actually don't have that much more, but here I can see, okay, this now looks indeed like an Excel sheet with 2 columns, subject and email. I can also double check, for instance, the size of this document. So if I do emails.shape, I will get kind of the shape. And so it says now, okay, you have 5 rows and 2 columns, which is accurate. So in that way I know, okay, my kind of Excel sheet has now been written accurately in Python here. And now what I want to do is, for instance, to select the first email in this database. So how do I do that? And now I can create a variable that is called first email. And I can say this is situated at the place 0. And it's always in coding. The first line, the first word is always then at place 0. And my column is called email body. Let me check if that's correct. No. So this was actually predicted by the Copilot agent, but the actual name of my column is email. So let me adjust that here. Yes, like this. So my column is called email, and it will now select kind of from this column the first element. So now I can press enter. And so now this variable first email should be the first email. So we can simply double check that by now just typing in first email. Yes. And let us press play. And indeed, now we get a string. Yes, and now that we have defined our first email variable, we can start defining the large language model to analyze the emails. And the first thing I want to do for this is to create a system prompt and a user prompt. So a system prompt is the prompt where I will explain what the large language model needs to do. And the user prompt is the prompt where I give the specific input. So here I now need to define what the system prompt needs to do. And so I can say something like our email analyzer. And you see now actually, because my GitHub Copilot agent is enabled, that it will start predicting what I want to do. Yeah? And actually this seems to be quite accurate. So let me do tab, and now we can check. And indeed, it says you're an email analyzer, analyze the sentiment and priority of the email provided, provide a brief summary, sentiment, and priority level. Yeah, so you see already that now it has predicted what I want to do. Now you can wonder yourself, how was it able to do so? Actually, if we go up a bit, you can see here that I added here as kind of comments that we want to create an email analyzer to analyze sentiment and priority of emails. So based on this comment, it can actually predict what you want to do here. That's the power of this GitHub Copilot agent, that it's really a powerful helper. And as user prompt, we want to give our input, and in this case, that's simply our first email. Yeah. Okay, so now I have my system prompt and user prompt, and now I want to kind of create the large language model. Now, in order to do so, I will briefly now copy paste my system prompts. And now I go to my Groq platform, where I can go to the playground, and here it will actually help me to build the code that I need. Yeah? So here you see system. So here I will now copy paste my system prompt. And for the user, it's the first email. And then actually here on the right-hand side, it has already built the code for me that I need for my large language model. We can choose here which open source model we use. Now we can use the OpenAI one, so that's all okay. So I need to nicely select what I need here. So I can now do copy, go back to my Microsoft Visual Studio Code, add now a coding block, and now we can paste it in. And first of all, I have to run this part so that it knows my variables. Now we can check here the code, and we have to be careful here because this is actually a variable, so not a string. So now I need to remove these ones so that I have again my variable, which always shows up in blue. So I have defined now in my code this as the first email. Yeah, so I don't want here these string signs. So in this way it should be accurate. So here I have the system prompt being described. I could also actually do it like this, and that's actually even nicer. So let me do that. So now instead of having this long part here, because I actually defined this up front, so let me remove this, and indeed do simply system prompt. And again, let me remove here this part, and now I should be able to execute the prompt. So let's press play, and indeed I get a green sign, so it has worked. So now we can check, and what I get now is a summary, sentiment, and the priority. Yeah, so here it says, okay, summary, so it's a summary of the email, sentiment, so in this case it says neutral positive, and priority is medium. Yeah, so in this way I now have my prompt being written here. Yes, so now we have kind of an output. Now again, if we want to do this multiple times, we want to get it as standardized as possible. So now we have a nice output, but this output is not really very standardized. And developers typically use JSON objects to have a clear standardized output. So what I actually want to do is to further standardize my output. And how do I do that? So I will create what is called an output format. So now I want to give a description of which exact output I want. And in this case, I want the output as a JSON object, which is typically what developers use. So now I can kind of create an output format instruction. So I can say provide as output. And again, here it's now already able to predict it what I want in JSON format with the following keys. So let me already accept. Now I don't want a summary, so that summary I will remove, but indeed I want to have the sentiment and priority, and then not the summary, so let me remove this part. So now I will actually change my user prompt. So now I will say user prompt structured, it was my prior user prompt, and plus my new output prompt. And actually this, I will just want to have a kind of space here. That's okay. So now I have defined a string, which is my old user prompt, which was the email. And I add to that my output format, which is this new output format. So now I press play, and maybe just to be sure, let us take a look at what this now is. So I can copy this, execute it, just to see whether indeed I now have not only the email, but also the output. Yeah, so indeed now it also mentioned the output, so that should be okay. And so now I can run my large language model again. So I will add code, I will copy paste what I did here. Yeah, so this is the kind of code that I had before. So I copy paste now my code again. I missed here the C, like this. And now instead of calling it the first email, I need to use now the user prompt structured. So this is now the variable that I need for my user prompt, so that it gets the right instructions to create the output. And now I can press enter. And now let's take a look at what I get as an output. And indeed, now you see I get a much simpler output. And this is what is called, it looks like a JSON object where the first key is sentiment and the value is neutral, and the second key is priority, and that's medium. So this output we now want to further process. Now in order to do so, we need to do some additional steps. Now actually, if you see here, it has created what is called a for loop. So actually it has printed out chunks of answers that the large language model has provided. So here it actually has printed out different chunks. Now, in order to actually use the output, we need to make some changes here. So first, I want to create an empty string called output. And now I actually want to kind of add all the chunks to this variable. So what I will change here now is I will remove the print statement and would say output. And now actually it's already predicts what I want. Yeah, so it's now adding all the chunks to the string. So in that way, by executing this for loop, it will build the output. And so if I will now execute this, and now if I do output, I have a variable that has a string that is looking like this. So it says, okay, I have a JSON object with sentiment, neutral, priority, medium. So that's now the output that I've received. Now this is still a bit messy, so this is something we will need to parse out. Yeah? So now I will need to select out of this string the parts here between brackets. Yeah? So how do we do that? So first I will now kind of have to say select from the string the parts between the brackets. So let's say, okay, I want a start value and an end value. Yeah? So the start value will be the value of the string where the starting bracket is, and the end value will be the part in the output where the end bracket is. And then the object that I want to get is from the string output, we select with the starting point this bracket and ending point this bracket. So that's what we will do here. And now this object I have to read as a JSON. Yeah? So we say, okay, find me in this string as a starting point this bracket, find me in the string as the ending point this bracket. So these are two new variables. Then I say, okay, from the string select start and end. So in that way I get my JSON object, and then this JSON object I have now to load as a real JSON. So let us now even type parsed output, and now when I do enter, let us take a look. I indeed get now a real JSON object with keys, sentiment, priority, and values neutral and medium. And from this JSON object I can now easily select the sentiment. So now I can create a new variable and the priority. Yeah? So now I can take from this JSON object sentiment and from the other one priority. And now we can run that. And if I now want to print out, so if I now want to print sentiment, we should get the value. And indeed, that's the neutral one. Yeah, so now we have kind of unpacked the output. So now we have done that for one single email in our file. Of course, we want to do that for all the emails, but now that actually becomes quite easy. What we now simply have to do is to create a for loop where we say, look, for every email in the document, do all these steps, save the output into a new list, and then we can store it again into our Excel. So let me briefly show you the logic here. Yes, so what we have is our Excel. Yeah, so this is our Excel with two columns, subject and emails. Yeah, so we have different emails in our Excel. And so what I did now is I took the first email and I have identified for that first email the sentiment and the priority. Yes, that we already did. And now what I can then do is I can store these things in a new list. Yeah, so I will create two lists, a sentiment list and a priority list. And so the sentiment that I will create, I will put here on the first step of the sentiment list, and the priority I will put as the first element in the priority list. So that's what I need to do now into the coding. And then I will go to the second email, again, create sentiment and priority, and then I will put that as the second element here. And again, I will add it to that list. And when I've done that for all four emails, I will put the list into a column and add that to the Excel file. Yeah, so that's what we will do, and the same for priority. So I will create two additional columns where we kind of transform these lists into columns, and in that way I will have the sentiments and priorities for all the emails. So that's what we now need to do. Might look now a bit chaotic and complex, but that's mainly how I have now drawn it, but you will see it's actually quite straightforward. Yes, so what we need to do first is to create two lists. So I will call one the sentiments, and that's an empty list, and this is how we create an empty list. And we have another priorities, and that's also an empty list. So these are at the moment our empty lists. And now I will have to create a for loop. And you see now what I can say is for every email in my emails and the column email, I can now every time again create the user prompt structured, yeah, which would be the email plus my output format. Go up now. Yeah, so every time now I create a new user prompt, which is then the email in that row plus the output format that I defined. Then every time it will execute my large language model. And then every time it will create this new output, it will parse the output. And in the end, the right output will be saved to the list. Yeah? So this is the code that I need to execute all these steps that I just shown you on the whiteboard. And now with one single click, we can read all the emails in our database, identify the priority and sentiment, and save that into this list. So now I'll just press enter, and you see after 2.3 seconds it has actually executed what I wanted. So now let us briefly take a look at this sentiments list, and indeed you see now I have a list with indeed 5 evaluations of 5 different emails, and we can do the same for priorities, where I should have a list with 5 priorities. Yeah, so this is okay. And so now the final thing I need to do is to transform these lists into columns that I can add to my database. Now I can say transform sentiments and priorities into columns of the data frame. Yes, and so now this code will say, okay, based this list sentiments, we should now become the column sentiments in email, and the list priority should become a column priority in the email. So that's okay. I can press enter. And now if I go to my database, so now I can do again emails.head, we should see 2 additional columns. Let's take a look here. So, and we indeed see now I have a sentiment column and a priority column. So now I have created 2 additional columns with emails, and now I can even export that again. So I can say export as Excel, and then here is the code to write that into a new Excel sheet that we can call customers emails analyzed. So I can press enter, and now you see immediately I get a new Excel file where these 2 columns are added. And now I did it for 5 emails, but you can easily do that for 100 or 1,000 emails. So here you really see the scalability of coding with large language models. Yeah, so I hope this video can help you to see how you can really become much more productive by doing coding for prompts, because actually you can repeat prompts very quickly for all kinds of use cases. So I hope this is helpful, and thanks for your attention. Bye.